Hi, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and we work on a Django app here, and we're going to continue on that app tonight. The plan is to go over a creation of a form page tonight, I think, and just continue on in the app. The goal is to teach people what I know about Django and make some progress on a side project. The side project that I'm working on is a homeschool application for scheduling for my homeschool family here, my wife and a couple kids, and so that's what I'm building for them. So the format of this is very open-ended. We'll be looking at some code, and I'll be writing some tests and doing all that stuff. You're welcome to use the chat. It is open. Just be civil, please. You know how to do that, so I don't think I need to remind anybody. And what else should you know? There's ways to get in touch with me if you want to. I'm on Twitter as MB Lehman. I'm on YouTube. You can search for Matt Lehman there. And if you want to subscribe, you can follow me here on Twitch. Do whatever you want to do. There's a link above to mattlehman.com where I have a bunch of articles that are usually about either Django or Python, sometimes occasionally about Vim if I'm feeling in a different mood. But you can subscribe there. I've got a newsletter that you can get information on when I post those articles. They tend to be pretty in-depth topic coverage. So that's that. One other thing. Well, two other things, I guess. There's also a Discord below. If you want to join in and ask questions that aren't a good fit for Twitter, that are longer, I do check it periodically through the week and engage with people as they have questions. I also have a Patreon account. So if you are really enjoying the content and you want to support me financially, I would love that, of course. It enables me to do a bunch of other stuff like hosting a podcast and paying for all that kind of thing. And thank you to my patrons, Rob and Rupert, my superhero patrons, and then Mark, Patrick, Eric, Ahmed. Thank you for giving. It's just really awesome that you are willing to support me in that way. Okay, so where are we at? We've been working on this milestone of building out the core chunks of functionality that are needed by this application. And as I do with many of these streams, I'll open up the models that we've been looking at so you get an idea of which chunks we need. We're kind of down to the end where every bit of this is essentially put into place, except for the kind of keystone, the capstone element that is merging together this concept of students who need to be in a homeschool and the grade that they need to participate in for the school year. And that concept is encapsulated by this enrollment model. And so we started giving a place for this form to exist last time, and we left it there because we'd already done a bunch of other stuff, getting all the links in place and that sort of thing. So we're going to continue on that path tonight, working through what this form will look like. It's going to be a bunch of template work and so on. But if you have any questions, ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development. I'm happy to take detours and try and answer as best I can. Okay, so let's get looking at some code, shall we? And I've got some decaf coffee tonight rather than my standard water, but that's what the mug's all about. All right, where are we? Well, let's fire up the app so you can see it. I'm going to put it in with the debug toolbar on and fire up Heroku local to get the application going. And if we do that and then open this browser over here, we can see, well, I'm not logged in the app. I've been going back and forth with the Hackathon app, and it seems that every time I do that, my GUnicorn server invalidates my session or something, so we need to log in first. So I'm going to log in with my test account, which is just a dummy account that I've populated with some data that I've done some web scraping from the other service that my spouse is using. And so we've got some data to look at, but we're not going to be super focused on that existing data today. There we go. And let's see, where were we? We were over here. So last time you saw this page, if you were joining in on the last stream, this was very gnarly looking. It was just enough to make sure that the data was there and present. I did spend a little bit of time, as you can see, cleaning it up. It's still not the most elegant interface in the world, but until I have more data about what my customer, who happens to be my wife, wants, I'm going to leave it in this style. So this is the students page. It's where they're going to go to do, check on the status of students, make sure that they're enrolled in their courses. Eventually, there'll probably be links to report cards and all sorts of extra jazz in here. But this is the minimal viable product for now. But our focus is going to be on enrollment. So there's this enroll button, and enroll does the linking between grade level and student, as I mentioned earlier. So what we're going to do is the URL that we've passed in, we can look at, and that's should be in the students URLs, I believe, is we're going to get the UUID of the student and the UUID of the school year. Okay, and the school year is where we can look up the particular grade level that is important for the actual connection. And so the form, because the data is pretty straightforward, the form is going to be a hidden field, which will be the student's UUID. It will be, I'm debating between like a radio button or a drop-down selector of grade levels associated with that school year. And so it'll be a single thing to select, and the user will select the right thing and hit enroll, and it'll add the student to that grade level for the school year. That's the plan. We have a view already. We last time only tested out the, what did we test out? I think we tested out the get side of it, so to make sure it returns a 200 response, but we didn't test out the post or any of that business. And we didn't test out the post because we haven't put in the data. We need to make sure that the proper data is actually getting added to the template into the context of the view, so that when it comes time to actually work on the template, we can go ahead and populate it with a view. So I think what we need to do is make sure that there is the context for the grade levels that are part of that school year. So I'm going to write a new test, and that test is going to be that we have the grade levels in the context. So the what's this? The grade levels for the school year are in the context. That's the test that we're trying to do. I like to structure my tests so that they arrange at the top, and then they do an act, and then they assert at the bottom. So we need to, actually we're going to copy probably a lot of this data that's here. We have a school year, we have a student. I'm going to change this, in fact, because really what I want is, I don't need to do a get check 200. We're just going to get on it, to do a get request, and then we want to assert context after that. So the context that I want to assert on is that there are going to be grade levels in the context. So we're going to say self get context grade levels, and we're going to assert that the list, because this will be a query set, so we want to make it a list so it's an easier comparison to do. We want to assert that that list is equal to a grade level, and that doesn't make sense yet because I haven't defined that local variable. So what I really want here is I don't need a school year. I want the grade level, and if we go back to the models diagram, we can see that the grade level has as a foreign key its relationship to a school year. So instead of this thing, I'm going to change this to grade level and change it to a grade level factory. And to wire this together properly, we're going to say school year, school, like this. And so what this is going to do, Factory Boy will generate not only the grade level that we care about, but also the school year, because we're not providing it explicitly. So anytime you have a foreign key in your model and you're generating fake data with Factory Boy, if that particular data is not supplied, then the factory is going to go to a subfactory. And so it will create the right data for us, and it will be accessible as an attribute on the grade level. So there's our test. And now we should be able to run this test, and it should fail because we have not set any context in here. And it's true. It's complaining that it can't find grade levels in the context because we haven't put it there. No surprise. Let's kill this at the bottom so we get some more space. So we've got this side-by-side view here. Did I put this at the bottom? Okay, I haven't even created a context method yet, so we need to add that first. So I'm going to steal this one up from up top because they all follow the same structure. We'll put that down here, and we need to make sure that we return the context, otherwise it's definitely not going to work. That's still going to fail though. I'm going to rerun the test just to prove it. We haven't touched what goes in here yet. So we need to do a couple things. We need to get out all of the grade levels for a particular school year, but we need to make sure that the school year is filtered to a particular user. So there's another test that we're going to be missing later, or that we're going to need for later, and it's that the test that user accesses their school years. I don't know. I'm not crazy about that test name, but we'll put a doc string. The user can only access school years associated with their school. That's way too long. User can only access, well, their school years is probably, that's good enough, because the rest of this is implied in the data model. So I think that's good enough. Okay, so we're going to write that test later. And this is because I want to make sure, I want to have confidence that eventually I've envisioned this app being multiple users. And I want to, I don't think that I'm going to have nefarious users, but you don't want to assume that everybody is nice in the world. And so I don't want people like copying me, more likely somebody would copy around a URL. Maybe they know somebody else that is like, how do I do this? And their friend shares them a link. I don't, it's kind of a crazy case, but I still want to make sure that there's protection in place so that I can say with confidence to any user, to the best of my knowledge, that their data is going to be safe, that no one else will be able to look at it, even if they have an account on the site. So I'm pretty consistent about any time I add a piece of data that could belong to somebody else, I check against the user to make sure it's theirs. And I just think that's a valuable thing to add. But we'll write that test second because it's a little bit more complicated to set up. So what do we want here? We want grade levels. We want so let's first pull out the school year UUID. And we know with confidence that that's going to be in the data because if the URL pattern doesn't match, well, let's stare at this together so I can be really concrete. So this path match here is going to expect a couple of UUIDs, and it's going to populate them into a UUID attribute and a school year UUID attribute. And anything that does not match that will fail. So we're guaranteed to have a UUID as this school year. Now, that's not to say it's a valid UUID or that the UUID belongs to the school. So there's actually another test here. Test invalid school year UUID that we need to write. And we'll say an invalid school year UUID is a bad request. I don't know if it's if we want a 404 on that or probably raise an actual 400 response, which is usually the bad request response. But that's another test we need to write. And frankly, because that's true, we also need to check that the student is true. We need to check that the student is a student that's associated with the user, and that the student is also a valid UUID. So both of those tests are going to be equally true, because what happens is if you query for something that's not a UUID, I believe it can fail in weird ways. Yeah. So, well, the more that I think on that, it might just filter down to nothing. So maybe it's okay. Maybe these tests are actually the same. They're slightly different, but yeah, they're going to be similar. So let's come back over to the views and jump to the bottom, and let's pull out into a local variable, because it'll be easier to look at than if we do it a different way. So we're going to say from the keyword arguments, we're going to get out the school year UUID. We're not going to use it yet, but I want to test. I still want to test that this is failing and that I pulled this out properly. We're not getting some weird key error. Okay, so we've got it still. That's good. So now we need to actually use this attribute to do a query. So we're going to take set the context. We can, I think, do this directly at this point and say grade levels. And we want to do a query on the grade level model and do objects filter. And I'm going to do the naive version that doesn't factor in the user yet. So we'll say school year, because we know that that's attached as a foreign key. And we'll do a double underscore because we're going to compare it to its UUID attribute, and then say school year UUID. That's the thing we want to check against. So now that we've added that, this should pass. Should pass this test, I think. And it does. That's good. But it's, so the way this is written right now, any user could pass in a school year from some other user and get their grade levels, even though they shouldn't have that access level. So now it's time to write a similar test, but for some other school. And so what I want to do here is I want to take this whole test for now, and we're going to tweak it along the way. So we still want, we'll just for the moment say we're still comparing to a valid student. That should be fine. But then when it gets down to the grade level, well, frankly, we don't care about the grade level. We really care about just a random school year, somebody else's school year. And the way that we make it somebody else's school year is by deleting the school attribute. So the factory boy will generate a new model instance, and it will see you haven't provided a school, and so it'll create a different school which will associate with a different user. So let's delete this, and let's delete grade level here. And so what we expect to come out the bottom, what do I expect it to be? Should this be a 404, or should it be a bad request, or should it be an empty list? It's probably easiest to just make it an empty list. And this is really a case that I don't expect people to hit. So I think I'm okay with it being an empty list. So then we want to say that list, let's say not grade levels, should be empty. Well, so that's probably not a very good test anymore, actually, now that I think about it, because there are no grade levels. So we could not validate that. So let's make a grade level to make sure that it has something to pull against. But let's delete out all this stuff and change it to grade levels. And we'll say grade level, school year. Okay, so now we know we have at least one grade level, and when we compare this here, what's going to happen, I believe right now, is it'll come back with a grade level when we said you should not have done that. Yep. So it found a grade level when it should not have found a grade level. Okay, so the way that we can do this to filter it out properly is to say we need to go up the chain and make sure that the school year also matches to the user that's doing the request. So we can do that by adding an extra filter clause here. And so we're going to add a comma, and we're going to say that school year, and the association is through the school, and there's an admin on the school, and we're going to say self request user. And this is safe to do because with all of these views that I've described, I'm always using the login required mixin. So by the time get context data is called, the self request user will be an actual user. It won't be an anonymous user, which can happen for a non-authenticated view. So if everything went according to plan, this test should now pass. Okay, and it does. So here's where we get into, is it worth having an extra test? Because, if I pass in a UUID here, that is let's say I generate this. All right, let me just walk through the test, and I'll probably end up deleting it, but that's okay. So the final scenario is we say, instead of using a grade level at all, we could pass in a random UUID by calling UUID4 from the standard library like this. And then because I think I'm going to delete this test, we'll just import it locally for the moment. So, whoops, UUID4, there we go. So now we have this data, and this test should pass, but it's not going to pass for any particularly good reason. It's going to pass because we're checking for any school years that belong to the user already. And so it's not going to explode when a bad UUID is passed. It's just going to filter out and say, I didn't find a match. So in effect, it's kind of no different. It's almost exactly the same as this scenario where it's passed in a UUID from a different user. Technically, there's a slight delineation where, this is testing one case where the admin, what if the admin was the same? It doesn't, I don't really, don't care. I don't think I need it. And that's what's important here, is I have to convince myself that this is good enough. So I think I'm happy enough with two tests. We have a test that guards and makes sure that someone can't look up other people's data, but at the same time, it can look up their own data. That's the positive and negative aspects. Okay, so that's the grade levels that need to be out of the view. With the other thing that's still missing right now is very similarly the student. There's two pieces of data that go into enrollment. There's the student and the grade level. The piece that's going to be set for the enrollment view, because of where the user is clicking the enrollment button, is the student. They're not going to have to select the student. That's already been pre-done when they came from the different step. So I don't want them to have to select between a student and a grade level. I want the choice to be just a single choice. So we need another test that is essentially just like this test, but it's going to be has student. Okay, and we say what is this? The student is in the context. That's it. And that's going to be as our UUID parameter. And we can leave the grade level. That's fine. All of that kind of leaves it like a happy path test. And then we say that, what do we want to assert? I want to assert that self get context on student is equal to student. All right, this test should fail because we haven't put it in there yet. But we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to say the student UUID is equal to self keyword args UUID. We have the same confidence that it's a UUID because of the path matching. And then we want to say that the student, so the context is student, and we're going to filter on the student model, objects. Well, actually, I guess this is one where we want a singular instance, and so we can do like a 404. So if they don't have access to it, we can fail a little stronger in this case. So we can say get object or 404, and the get object or 404 takes like the query set that you want to filter against. So we want to do against the student model, and the attributes that we want to filter against are the UUID is the student UUID. All right. So let's rerun the test, and it passes. Okay, there's a problem here though. Same problem as before. This is filtering. This is going to permit any student. So let's change this because you don't want to enroll just somebody else's random student. We'll say another student is not viewable. I don't know. And so to do this, what am I? Oh, I have a test. Looks like I've already used a similar name in the past, but I'll keep it. Not other students. So we'll go in here and we're going to delete the contents here, so that ensures that the student is associated with some other school. We'll leave the grade level. We'll leave all the other attributes, and this time we're going to do. I'm going to keep the response out of here because I want the response to be. We want to assert the response is a 404. We don't want that page to even show up if they somehow got there from a weird state. And like I don't think this is a bad behavior, because the only way you could ever get here is if like somebody tried to share a link between friends or something. It's like that link's naturally not going to work for someone else, and so it should just say, sorry, you can't view that link. Or I guess even better, what it's really saying is I didn't find that. So it doesn't even leak information that student exists. It just says, I don't know what you're talking about. So from a security perspective, that's a good thing. So this test will fail because it's going to return a 200 when it really should have returned a 404. So the other aspect that we're going to include here is to say the school admin is equal to self request user. Now the test passes, and if we test the whole class, all of these tests should be passing. So we've got all the data now for our template. We're ready to move on to the template at this point, because the student's there and the grade levels are there. Let's go over the template, which is a complete train wreck at the moment. It has nothing to do with enrollment, because I copied it from some other file, and we were planning to change it. So this is coming from the add student or edit student form, and that doesn't make any sense anymore. So the header, what is the header going to be? Well, the first thing to note is that I think with enrollment, I'm planning to either you're going to enroll somebody or you're going to delete it. This is not really a piece of data that you're going to want to edit. So this create attribute that I'm using for sometimes on these different views is not going to apply. So we're going to delete this if clause and the whole chunk over here, and the same story up above here to simplify this template further and further. And I'll clean up the student part in a second. and the title. Let's get all this junk out of here. So we can now say, let's say enroll, and then for context, we'll say student full name. And does this view have the school year? I don't think we put the school year. We might need the school year, because I might want to say in or for the blank, school year. It's just going to give the extra context that we need, that we will really want. So let's go back. Let's go return to those views for just a minute and add that other little bit of data so that they can get that. Okay, sorry about the detour. So the other piece that we want is we want to test that the school year is present. Has school year. The school year is in the context. And this time we're going to rely on grade level, and we'll say school year and grade level school year. That should fail. Okay, and it does. Come back over to this side. Oh, phooey. All right, let's rework this a little bit. So this is where tests are useful, because you can kind of refactor things, and if the test still passes, you should be confident. So I know that I want to put the school year in, but I've only used it to do the grade level filtering. But now we should be able to take this. We should be able to say school year, and well, I guess we are going to change behavior, because we were doing an empty list before, but now we're going to 404 in the same way, just like we did with the student object. So get object or 404, we will take the school year model, and we're going to filter on UUID. Whoops, that was terrible. UUID, just like above, and the school year UUID. Okay, so that should give us that chunk. And now when we do the filtering for grade levels, we're really filtering on not the UUID, but the actual school year. Okay, and there's that. So that shortens that. This isn't quite correct yet. In fact, I want to change this to go ahead and put this in the context as this. And that's going to mess this up. So we'll have to do a context lookup to get it. Whoops. Okay. So now we're getting it from the context, because that's where we assigned it to, rather than putting in a local variable. So that should make this test pass. Okay. But now this test should fail, because it's going to be, whoop, why did that pass? What's the self response? Huh. Why are you returning a 200? That's curious. Well, I know I haven't fixed this up totally properly yet. Oh, it's because I haven't fixed it up yet. Okay, the other thing that we are going to change about behaviorally is that this thing is not going to work this way. We are going to expect it to 404. And the reason we're going to expect it to 404 is we're going to move the checking of the admin here up to this 404. So we're going to come to the end and we'll say the school admin attribute is going to be self request user, and delete that from the grade level. Like that. So I think this should now 404. Yep. Okay, so that gives us the same guarantees, the same kind of checks that you can't just use somebody else's school year, but it's moved it up to the level of a 404, which I guess, well, it's probably behaviorally about the same in terms of how much information it reveals about what might be in the system. Okay, we now have we've revisited the data. We've got this new chunk of data that's there. I think I'm happy with everything that we've done. I suppose I could write a test that says that the school year will 404, but we kind of prove that through checking for the grade levels, which is derivative data. Let's go back to the enrollment form, and I will take everything from enroll to the end here and yank it and put it there. And let's delete this line. So let's check out how the template looks. Okay, this still looks terrible, but because it's not a form yet that has the proper data, but at least has the right title. And what you can't see, I'm pretty sure, is the title up here. It now says Enroll Ben Lehman, as I'd expect it to. Okay, so let's move on to what's going to go a little actually in the field. And we're going to use a hidden field. And I've used a hidden field in a number of circumstances. Like over here. I'll just steal this for the moment. And we'll put a hidden field in here. And the hidden field is going to be the student, because that's already coming from there. And so we need to say student ID, and that sets that. The other parts of this that we want are, if we cancel here, we'll go back to the student's index page. That's the right place to go. And we want to change the button to enroll. And then I'll come back. Let's just comment that out for a moment. So this should be look like an empty form now when it reloads. All right. And if we inspect stuff, we will hopefully find buried in here a form. Oh, there it is. Hidden input, student value 14. That's what I want. I don't remember if anywhere on this site if I've used a radio for my templates or not. I have not. Because I think the template is going to offer something that's a lot nicer than a selector. Selector is a fine approach, but if I think about the structure of this data, I mean, we're talking about schools here, and I'm primarily focused on U.S. primary and secondary schooling, and in the U.S. it is kindergarten is the youngest through 12th grade, and so there are 13 total possible options that are reasonable. I can't imagine that any country would have any like significant number more, and I'm talking like an order of magnitude here, give or take 5, whatever. But I think that the list would be very approachable. And I also can't imagine that anyone would have enough students to populate 20. Like no one that I know of has 20 children. So in other words, what I'm trying to get at is that from a data presenting perspective, having a radio option rather than a drop down where you have to click and then make a selection seems like it'll be a nicer choice. If I can just say, here are your options, pick the radio option, and you can see them all at once on a single screen, that just seems like it'll be a smoother interface because you have all of the information presented to you right as you see the page. You don't even have to click something to select it. So I think that's what I want to do. So let's go to Tailwind site, and go to the forms area and see how they style radio buttons, because that's what we want to try and use. So I'll take, what I love about Tailwind is because it's a utility framework, you can take what they have, if there's an example, which there might not be one in this scenario. Let's search for radio. Oh, shoot. Do they really have nothing for radio options? Well, there's something I didn't anticipate. Okay, let's keep going. What I was about to say is that with Tailwind, you can take what the CSS is presented there as a good starting point and then massage it to what you want it to be, so you don't have to do as much thinking. So is there a forms section? Like an input? Come on. Input? Well, I know that the Tailwind team has been using they've also been working on a site called Tailwind UI to give exactly this, more examples, and that is a pay service that I probably would like to pay for at some point. I was hoping to get something right out of the gate, but maybe we just need to try this out ourselves. And if I can't find something nice, like a select is not the end of the world. I do have some select choices in the site already, so it is a reasonable choice. But what is it we have? So the more I'm thinking about this, I'm wondering if like putting the grade levels is maybe not the right way to go. And why am I thinking that way? We're using a create view. The create view, where am I? Sorry. Here's a create view. It's building a model, a form, from this enrollment model, which means if I come over here and look in the debug toolbar and I expand this, there should be a form in the context. There it is. And so it expects grade levels. And right now, I don't know that it's blocking. I don't know what it's going to do to evaluate. Like if I were to evaluate the grade level to display, I don't know what it would show. It might try to show all grade levels. I'm not really sure, because these forms are designed to know the kind of data that you need to expect, and well, maybe it doesn't know anything because it's a single value. It's not like a query set of things to loop over. So it doesn't even have any notion that it should be from. The best it could do is like the entire grade level table, which is not a reasonable thing to do. So we have to populate this with something. Okay, kind of flopping around here. I recognize that. So we'll put something down, and it may look terrible, and maybe that's okay to start. It's one of those things, I think I mentioned this in the last stream, is that styling these things on the stream, for whatever reason, I can do little tweaks here and there, but thinking about the way that I want something to finally look in that's new and novel that I haven't done on the site before, takes a little bit more brain power than I can muster while also communicating and vocalizing. I don't know if it's something about using this part of my brain that has to speak to you, as well as the creative side of my brain, but that's just been my experience. So the first thing we're going to do is dump out the grade levels just to see them. So we'll say for grade level in grade levels, and we will put all that information out, and we'll say, well, for now, let's just dump out the name. Okay, see what that looks like. All right, 2 options that I expect. This is the school year that's available, and so that's what we're going with. It's pulling from the current school year, and already that's interesting. So let me think through this here. Let me connect where I think I might be missing. In this scenario, if I'm populating this enrollment thing, I'm pulling it from the current school year because that's what's being displayed on this page, I believe, is the... How did I get here? Go back to the views, and we go to the students index page. The school year it's pulling from is the current school year. And so that's either going to be now or it's going to be into the future. But that, if I'm thinking about the long-term planning of this will be a fine onboarding experience for the first year, because this page, if you're a first-time user, and you've created your first school year, it'll say enroll, and then super, you enroll in the thing that you just created, and it's all good. If you are coming around for your second time, though, that's where it gets sticky, because if you're already in the middle of a school year and you're doing a bit of advanced work to plan out for the next school year, then if the enroll button is wired to the current school year, it's just gonna be wrong. If that doesn't make sense to worry about it, I think I'm gonna punt on that whole logical problem. Like there's probably gonna be other places where I have to connect an enroll button to a different school year. But for now, perhaps it's okay to use the current school year, and maybe I can expand this in the future to say which school year so that the user knows exactly what they're getting themselves into. All right, but for the moment, let's return to this page. We've got this thing, and we need to use a radio button. So I want to say, this is where I need to look up the input type. So let's go to MDN and search for input and radio, because that's the type we want. And it can remind me of all the syntax. And I'll probably also say that what do we have? We've got, are these wired up? Yep, okay. So these are wired up appropriately. And that's probably because of the label. So let's put in the gnarly version first. And so each one of these is going to be like a div group. So let's put in a div tag. And that'll give the block level scoping that we want. And then, as it showed, it's an input tag. And the type is equal to radio. And the value is going to be equal to the primary key of the grade level. So we want grade level ID. Whoops. that would have been a raw string. That's not what we want. We want to use the template here to template expansion syntax. So there's the value. And we need to give it a name, really. So the name of this field is also going to be grade level, because that's what the form is going to expect. Okay, and then we can close it off like this. I think I'm going to put one extra thing in there, though, to kind of automatically, well, no, maybe that's not realistic. I'm worried about two things. What if I don't select something and then the user hits the submit button? What would happen? The form would send nothing. In that case, it's probably going to come back and complain about a required field, which is maybe what I want. The other option is I could pre-populate something with checked, and then it would have one of the radios buttons selected already, so that it was always safe to submit something. But then that doesn't necessarily make much sense, because you don't necessarily just want to pick the first school year that's there, unless you had a single student. So it's kind of a toss-up. The average family that I think would homeschool is likely to have more than one kid based on my experience. So I think what I'll do is I'll leave it unchecked. And so we'll say so then we need to add the label, and we need to add the for to do this accessibly, or with accessibility. And so we'll say for, I think this, you connect it to the value, is that right? No, you connect it to the ID. All right, so we'll add in an ID as well. And we'll say, I'm going to repeat grade level .id. And this is not associated with the form submission data. This is associated with the accessibility. To connect a form HTML label with an input, you have to connect them via ID. And since this is all of these IDs are guaranteed to be unique per grade level, it's safe to use the grade level as the identifier. And I suppose that I could prefix, like if there were other fields on here that I needed to worry about, that I had an ID for, I could prefix this stuff and say like grade level, like this, and then do it on the same thing on the ID. But I think that's an overkill for this scenario because it's such a simple form. So we'll say for, and then we'll say the grade level name, which I think I can just leave that out and yet use the stir representation. And let's ditch that. Let's try this, see how it looks. Okay, unstyled, but we can click this, we can click this. Both work. I don't know, like, you have to click the actual label element, label text to make that work right, which is okay. I think, in my opinion, the better form of this, or the easier to select form, I don't actually know how a browser with someone with accessibility needs deals with this. But if we take this structure and wrap and put the input inside of the label, I think what it does is it makes the entire area clickable rather than just whatever the text. So let's do a compare and contrast. Like if I give so let's add some classes to this. We'll say class, and we'll give it a padding of 4 all around just for the moment, and say on hover we want what's the background color stuff? Oh, there it is down below. BG color gray 200 just for the moment. I just want to see how this looks. Okay, so that's terrible. You can see that. Switch it to margin, first of all. That'll actually space them out properly, I think. Really? Huh. Well, you can see there's the hover is there. I don't know why. Maybe the class padding needs to go on the outer part. Okay. So there's still some work to do, clearly. But what if we switch this back to like padding, and now we'll do 2. Just want to give an example of what I'm talking about. Okay. And to make it super clear, let's use 4. So we've got this big, gigantic target. On the other one that I just showed, I think that it would only select second grade, for instance, if you clicked either the radio itself or the label text second grade. With this version, I think, yeah, I can click anywhere inside of this bounding box and it will select that, which just, I think what that does is it makes a nice big target to make this very clickable and very obvious. So no one has to click right here. They just kind of get that feeling of, oh, this is a button. I can click this thing. So I'm going to use that style. I've given an appropriate amount of space between them, I think. Although I'm not crazy about how it's shifted from your point of view that way, right? To the, well, gosh, my head orientation's all out of whack. To the right. So let's do it on just the Y for this outer one. So we'll change it to PY, which will move it back to the left. It's still slightly indented because it is a radio. Although, no, again, that's because I have another P. So if we say PY here, now it's going to be, but then that looks pretty nasty of having like the actual hover loses the shape around it. So I think I'm okay with a little bit of indenting. I just didn't want it to be excessive. Okay. The other thing about this that I don't like, look at the button sizes. So kindergarten is a longer word or longer phrase, I guess, than second grade. One's a word, one's a phrase. And you can see they have unequal sizes on the hover, which isn't cool. So we'll say, we'll give it a minimum width, I think we can do. Min width. So if we give a minimum width of 100% here, and then give this like a surrounding div a maximum width, then what we'll do is that will effectively even out the buttons. So there might be some extra spacing, but we'll just be making bigger targets that are even. So we'll come in here and we'll say that each one of these things is going to be, what was it? Min width full. Or, you know, it's not even min width, just say width full. And now, well, that didn't do what I expected it to do. Why not? Oh, because okay, because I only put the padding and hover on the label. Okay, so let's ditch that and change this to width full here. Still not doing it. What's going on here? Width full, 100%. Ah, thank you, Firefox. Width has no effect on this element since it has a display of inline. Okay, there is an inline block. Inline block. Yep. So if we change the label to have a different type to inline block, I think that might have the effect that we want. If I typed it correctly. All right, now we can see something else happened in that process of I think I had margin previously or something. There's definitely something extra going on at this point that was not happening before. So let's drop this down to like 2. Should bring this up tighter. Okay, maybe not even. What if let's just say 0 for a moment. Okay, so that they're touching now. So 2 was too much because what it does is additive. So there's the 2 above and the 2 from the next element. So if we change it to 1, that means that when they're joined together, it makes a 2 space between them. So it's kind of an exponential scale here. So that provides a little bit of space between them, which feels good. If I click, now I can click either of these gigantic buttons and it feels nice. The other thing is this is feeling like really claustrophobic at this point because the second grade and kindergarten are really tight to that radio button. So I'm going to come in here and go into the actual radio element and we'll go add a class on it and we'll give it a margin right of maybe, we'll start with 2, see how that looks, just to like nudge it over a little bit. Expands it out, that feels pretty good. And then for the whole label, let's make these are now, I want them to look like big buttons. So let's try a rounded large on it. Ooh, there's also another thing I'm noticing here is that we've got a pretty tight space between this button and the enroll button below. So we'll need to give that some breathing room. That large margin might be too much. Let's use the normal margin and see how that feels. So it's enough to shave off the edges and it matches up with our enroll button. I think I don't use large anywhere because it's very roundy. So that's feeling pretty good. Now let's take, let's wrap this whole thing in a div and so that we can give a margin bottom 4 on it and put all of our grade levels in there. And what that does is it gives that spacing that is nice for between the actual button. So it's not like you accidentally click boom, boom. You just get this effect now. So I think this is what I want. And I think we can try it, and I think it will fail. Because I haven't defined a post method for, well, it's a create view, so there's a post method. So maybe this actually will work, just as is. Let's try it. And then we can just write the test to prove the post works for the future. So let's enroll Ben Lehman in kindergarten. Let's see if how that goes. Ah, no URL to redirect to, but I think it created the record. So this is what happens after success. Let's go back. Let's go check out the office, which is what I'm calling the admin in my site. And let's go to the enrollment area. And yeah, there it is. Ben Lehman is enrolled in kindergarten. For the purpose of this test, so we can check it again, I want to delete that. And now we can return here and see that we've still got the enroll button. Let's come back to the enrollment page. and we need a place for this to go. After the most appropriate place is probably back to the student's index, because that's where we think they came from so far. So we need there's a get success URL that we need to use, and in fact that one's this is the student create view, and we want to send them the same spot. So let's use that. Okay. So the web server should be restarted with the student's index. And now let's try and put Ben Lehman into second grade. Enroll. Ben Lehman is enrolled in the 2020 school year. Perhaps, I wonder, well, this is something I can work out with my spouse later. Like, I don't know if this might be enough information. It might be better if it said like what grade level the student's enrolled in. So it could say Mark is enrolled in second grade in the 2020 school year. That is, I mean, but this statement's true, but the other statement's more, has more information. But what's cool about this is that through not very much work, we added some context data, and we told it to use a create view, and we gave it a place to go once it was successful. There wasn't a ton that we had to do to make the template work. Let's clean it up. We've got some commented out fields that we don't need. Longer term, this is a pattern that I haven't used anywhere yet. As you saw when I did a search for radio, nothing popped up. So this is the first time that I'm adding a radio input anywhere on the site. And what a lot of my forms have had so far is a lot of duplication. Offline, I have gone back and made some actual partial things to include, so that the things that are going to be common, like character fields and all that sort of stuff, I can use an include tag to do that. But since this is the first time I'm using a radio, I'm just going to leave it as is. I don't need to prematurely extract that into some reasonable component. But you can see that, I took out the knowledge that I gained from doing a bunch of forms and the styling that I wanted on them, and I made this template fragment. So this thing that you see here is all of the stuff that goes into a field, and I've baked it into that so it will all display properly, and I can just pass a form field into it, assuming that it handles the types properly, and it works pretty well. But it doesn't work with every field type yet. So that's something that I can do in the future as I start making more forms. If I get to 2, 3, 4 different radios, I'm sure I'm gonna see a common pattern of they all have this kind of look and feel. Here's the kind of input parameters I need to pass in, and then I can make that generic. There are ways you can do this with other toolkits like Django crispy forms that kind of do it on the Python side and give you a toolkit that you plug in with Bootstrap or some other stuff. And that approach just didn't quite work for me and what I wanted to do. So I'm going with template includes. But I didn't do that on this particular form because this was new and novel. Okay, so now we need to what do we need to do? We saw it work, but I think that the form that we've used is not good enough, because it's not doing actual checking. So like I said, I don't want people to access other people's information. I also don't want people to be able to inject other information in some other user. A clever user right now could craft a post request that had some random student ID and some random grade level and just smash them together and just create an enrollment when they shouldn't necessarily have that ability. So our create form needs to have better validation. It needs to be smarter. And I think that is probably going to be what we work on next time. I don't want to get too deep into this. We've already been going for an hour just to work on some template and context data, and that feels like a reasonable stopping point, because I think adding the form and adding the extra validation could take us another 45 minutes to an hour to go through and add all the tests. What can we do though to finish this off? I think there is a thing that we can do. We can do the happy path test to make sure that all of this works out. If we come into the test views file and add a test for the post. So there's all this test for gets and stuff, and we want to add a post test. So I'm going to take this get test that's here, and I'm going to put a post test right below it, and we'll say test post, and we're going to need a grade level, and we're doing the happy path test. So I'm going to assume that all the data is correct, and then we'll add in the extra test to do validation next time. So we want to post to this endpoint, and we want to do grade level, school year UUID, because we still have to construct that. And then the data that's going to go into this is a data of a student, which will be the string version of the student ID and the grade level, which will be the string version of the grade level ID. And that will go into the post as data, I believe. Yep. So that should work. And then the other thing we need to check is, okay, is there an enrollment that matches what we expect to find? So is there an enrollment that filters to student is the student and the grade level is the grade level? And does that thing exist? That's the test. We need the enrollment model, which comes in the students models area. Put that right here. And come back to the test and run it, and it passes. And that's not anything I did. That's just the grade level, the create view stuff. But that will be a good test when we plug in our custom form, making sure that this is still a happy path test. The next time that we meet, we will do a test to test. What's the test going to be? Test valid student submission. So the post contains a valid student for the user, as in like that student is in their school. And the same thing is true of the grade level. Test valid grade level submission. And again, we can trace that up through the school year to the school which a user owns the school. And these are going to be like the two to-do items. So we need to write the custom form to do this validation. And I've written this kind of validation elsewhere in the app, so this will be mostly a kind of a copy-paste effort, but go digging all that up is the harder part. Okay, so we can stop here and we can run, make sure everything is covered, and that should test everything out. The suites, it's getting up there, so it's not quite as snappy as it used to be, but that's to be expected on newer projects or projects that are maturing. Actually, the opposite of newer projects. And you can see we've got a 100% statement coverage. So yeah, that's good. To review, we really spent a lot of our time writing tests this evening. Just tests of different type, putting in context data, checking the access control on it. Most of it was focused on using standard idioms that Django provides of getObject or 404 out of the URL attributes, and putting the grade levels in the context, and then fixing up the template to have a nicely styled input. I thought I was going to leave it kind of junky, but this was one that turned out to be, I knew exactly what I wanted, so we could do the Tailwind templating stuff and get all of that going in a reasonable amount of time. So yeah, that's that. So let's commit this stuff, and let's see, we'll call this add template for enrollment creation. And this is for, because we're not done yet, we still need to do that validation. So this is for the issue 88. And I add this stuff in there to kind of give me like historical context. So what's nice about this from GitHub's perspective, if you've never done it before, is now I'm going to push this up to GitHub. That's what GP stands for. It's for Git push. It's an alias that I have in my shell. So this is going to go up to GitHub. And now when I visit this issue, I've got this traceable commit that's there. So, far future me, if this project lives for a long time, and I ever needed to come back and look at the code and understand what I was doing at the time and see the checklist that I was working from to understand the technical decisions I might have made, then I have that ability there. So I think that's a pretty cool feature from GitHub to connect the history of your issue tracker with your actual code repository. It's just kind of a nice add-on to the system. It's not strictly required, of course, but I like to use it. Okay, I think that brings us to where I want to stop for the evening. Thank you for tuning in. Sort of a shorter one tonight. Have pretty clear goals. Future stuff, let's look a little bit ahead and see what's next. There's one more item after this that tackles an empty state spot on the app. But after that, all of the major pieces, the create and edit views that need to be there for a new user to actually get everything going for someone to actually use the app on a regular basis will be in place. That's what this milestone was all about. From there, I did do another round of feedback with my wife, and she gave me a bunch of items that we still have to work through before the app is truly usable for her. It's amazing what you can see through some user testing. I mean, she tried to add some data, and I immediately saw bad navigation patterns. Not any fault of hers, but it was more of I didn't wire things together. So she would click to do something, and it would send her back to a page that wasn't what you would expect. So she'd have to do 2 or 3 clicks to get back to where she needed to go. And it was really obvious that there are some opportunities to really streamline the experience. So we recorded all these items. We'll do that. We'll get more of that user feedback and keep going on the app. So that's the plan. Thank you for joining in. I've as I say at the beginning of the stream, you can follow me on Twitter as MB Layman. I'm on Discord where you can ask me questions as well. I also pop my head into the Django forum. So if you ask questions over there, it's a great place to go if you have questions that multiple people can answer, because I certainly don't know everything about Django, and there's a lot of smart folks that are on the forum. So if you've got a question, head over there. I will take this content and post it up on YouTube if you want to refer back to anything that you saw here. But that's pretty much it. Thank you for joining in, and have a good night. Take care.